"Ma'am, I need you to place your hands behind your back." The words cut through the crisp morning air like a blade, but General Amelia Richardson didn't flinch. She'd heard worse commands in combat zones across 3 continents. What made her pulse quicken wasn't fear. It was the absolute certainty that everything about this moment was wrong. "Officer, there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in Pentagon briefing rooms. "If you'll just allow me to show you my..." "Step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them." Officer Danny Diaz's hand rested on his weapon, his partner Jake Thompson positioning himself at an angle. Their body cameras blinked red in the dawn light. Amelia's mind raced through tactical assessments, not for escape, but for de-escalation. 37 years of military service had taught her to read situations, and this one was spiraling based on assumptions that had nothing to do with facts. She stood beside her unmarked government sedan, still wearing the civilian clothes required for her classified morning briefing: dark jeans, simple blazer, no visible rank or insignia. To these officers, she was just another black woman who'd apparently gotten too close to the federal research facility. "I'm trying to cooperate," she said, slowly raising her hands. "But I'm expected at a 0700 briefing that affects national security. If you'll just let me show you my identification." "Ma'am, you were observed acting suspiciously near a restricted area," Thompson interjected, pulling out his handcuffs. "You failed to immediately comply with our request for identification." The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent the last year heading a Department of Defense task force on military-civilian cooperation, and now she was living the exact scenario her report had warned about: the dangerous intersection of assumption, authority, and prejudice. "What's your name, ma'am?" Diaz asked, though his tone suggested it was more procedure than genuine interest in her answer. "General Amelia Richardson, United States Army," she replied clearly, watching their expressions for any sign of recognition. "Nothing." If anything, Thompson's eye roll suggested he thought she was delusional or attempting to deceive them. A small crowd had begun to gather across the street. Early morning joggers, a few federal employees arriving for the day's shift. Phones appeared, angling toward the scene. Amelia's stomach tightened not from personal embarrassment, but from the institutional embarrassment this would cause. The optics alone would trigger congressional hearings. "Look, lady," Thompson stepped closer, handcuffs gleaming, "you can tell us you're the Queen of England, but right now you're detained for suspicious activity near a federal facility. Turn around." The moment crystallized with painful clarity. 3 feet away sat her briefcase containing files that could influence defense policy for the next decade. In her jacket pocket, her Pentagon-issued phone buzzed constantly with messages from her aide, wondering where she was for the briefing that would determine funding for community policing initiatives, including training programs designed to prevent exactly this type of incident. But none of that mattered to Officers Diaz and Thompson, who saw only what their preconceptions allowed them to see. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Amelia caught sight of a black SUV with government plates turning the corner 3 blocks away. Her security detail, finally realizing she was late for the most important briefing of her career. She closed her eyes briefly, knowing that in about 60 seconds, everything was going to change for everyone involved. The SUV's engine grew louder. "Hey, my friend, hope you're doing well. Drop a comment and let me know how you're feeling about this story so far and where you are watching from." The black SUV's doors slammed shut with military precision. Colonel James Park emerged first, his face a mask of controlled fury as he took in the scene. His commanding general in handcuffs, surrounded by local police officers who clearly had no idea what they'd just done. "Release her immediately," Park commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. He flashed his credentials with one hand while speed dialing with the other. Officer Diaz looked between Park and the woman he'd just restrained, confusion replacing confidence. "Sir, this individual was acting suspiciously near the perimeter and refused. That individual is General Amelia Richardson, and you've just detained the person responsible for overseeing the very facility you're supposed to be protecting." Park's aide, Lieutenant Sarah Paul, stepped forward with a tablet displaying Amelia's official Pentagon photograph alongside her credentials. The color drained from Thompson's face as the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just any mistake. This was career-ending catastrophe captured on body cameras and cell phones. As the handcuffs were removed, Amelia rubbed her wrists and studied the officers' faces. Diaz looked genuinely shaken, the kind of man who'd joined law enforcement to serve his community and was now realizing he'd become part of the problem he'd wanted to solve. Thompson, however, wore the defensive expression of someone already calculating how to minimize his responsibility. "General, we need to get you to the briefing," Park said quietly. "Secretary Hawkins is waiting, and the committee members are already asking questions." Amelia nodded, but her attention was drawn to the growing crowd of federal employees who'd witnessed the incident. Among them stood Dr. Marcus Glenn, the facility's research director, and someone she'd known since their days at West Point. His presence here, 20 minutes before his usual arrival time, struck her as odd. "Dr. Glenn," she called out. "Interesting morning for an early arrival." Glenn approached with what appeared to be genuine concern, but Amelia's trained eye caught something else. Relief? "General Richardson, I'm horrified by what just happened. I had no idea you were arriving this early, or I would have coordinated with security." "The timing was classified," Amelia replied carefully. "Only 3 people knew about this morning's schedule." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Park's expression darkened as he realized the implication. Someone had leaked information about Amelia's arrival, but not her identity. Someone had wanted her stopped, questioned, potentially embarrassed or delayed, without knowing exactly who she was. Thompson seized on Glenn's apparent authority. "Sir, if you could verify this woman's identity, we can clear this up quickly." "This woman is General Richardson," Glenn said, but his tone carried an undertone Amelia recognized from their academy days. Marcus had always been skilled at saying the right words while meaning something entirely different. "Though I have to say, General, your choice to arrive in civilian clothes near a restricted area was unconventional." There it was, the subtle shift of blame, the gentle suggestion that she'd somehow contributed to her own mistreatment. From someone who knew better, who understood military protocol, who was supposed to be an ally. Amelia felt the familiar sensation she'd experienced in hostile territory, the realization that the enemy might be closer than expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Secretary Hawkins. "Where are you? The committee is threatening to walk if we delay further. This funding vote cannot be postponed." The briefing she was late for would determine whether the military received $3 billion for community engagement programs designed to prevent incidents like the one she'd just experienced. The irony was so sharp it cut. "Colonel Park, get me to that briefing room," she said. "And Lieutenant Paul, I want a full review of who had access to my schedule." Someone wanted this to happen. As they moved toward the SUV, Amelia caught sight of Diaz talking quietly into his radio, his voice carrying further than he probably intended. "Need to know if there were any flags on this individual. Any reason we might have been told to watch for someone matching her description." The betrayal crystallized. This hadn't been random racial profiling or a simple case of mistaken identity. Someone had specifically flagged her for police attention, using the very biases they'd hoped would ensure she'd be delayed or detained. The question was whether Glenn was part of the setup or simply taking advantage of its aftermath. Either way, as her SUV pulled away from the scene, Amelia realized her real battle wasn't in the briefing room ahead. It was figuring out who among her trusted colleagues had decided she posed enough of a threat to engineer this morning's humiliation. The funding vote that could change community policing forever would have to wait. She had a traitor to catch. The Pentagon briefing room held the kind of silence that preceded either breakthroughs or disasters. Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawkins stood at the head of the polished table, her expression unreadable as she watched Amelia enter 45 minutes late with Colonel Park at her side. "General Richardson," Secretary Hawkins said coolly. "I trust there's an exceptional explanation for keeping the Senate Defense Appropriations Subcommittee waiting." Around the table sat 5 senators, their staffers, and the Joint Chiefs who'd been expecting Amelia's presentation on the Community Engagement Initiative. $3 billion in funding hung in the balance, and everyone in the room knew that delays at this level usually meant political death for proposed programs. "My apologies, Madam Secretary. I was detained by local law enforcement in an incident that, unfortunately, exemplifies exactly why this funding is critical." Senator Catherine Pierce, the subcommittee chair known for her sharp questioning, leaned forward. "Detained? General, are you suggesting you were arrested?" "I was handcuffed and held for questioning while attempting to access this facility for our scheduled briefing. Despite repeatedly identifying myself and offering credentials, local officers proceeded with detention based on what they later admitted was suspicious activity near the perimeter." The room's temperature seemed to drop. Senator Pierce and her colleagues exchanged glances that spoke volumes about the political implications. A decorated black general detained by police while trying to attend a briefing about police reform was either the perfect argument for the funding or a scandal that would derail it completely. "General," Senator Robert Hayes spoke up, his southern drawl carrying decades of political calculation, "I hope you're not suggesting that this alleged incident should influence our evaluation of your proposal." Amelia recognized the trap immediately. Acknowledge the racial dynamics and be dismissed as playing the victim card. Ignore them and watch the committee pretend systemic problems didn't exist. "Senator Hayes, I'm suggesting that my experience this morning provides real-time validation of the gaps we've identified in military-civilian cooperation protocols. The officers involved were responding to information that someone with access to classified scheduling, provided them." Secretary Hawkins' poker face cracked slightly. "Are you alleging that someone deliberately leaked your movements to local law enforcement?" "I'm stating that fact, ma'am. Only 3 individuals knew about this morning's timing and route. The leak was intentional." Colonel Park stepped forward with a tablet. "Madam Secretary, we've confirmed that the local precinct received an anonymous tip about suspicious individuals near the facility 30 minutes before General Richardson's arrival. The tip specifically mentioned the type of vehicle she was driving and her approximate description." The room erupted in whispered conversations between senators and their aides. This was no longer about funding community programs. This was about a security breach at the highest levels of military operations. Dr. Glenn, who'd been escorted to the briefing as a witness, cleared his throat. "If I may, Secretary Hawkins, while this morning's incident is regrettable, we shouldn't allow it to overshadow the substantive questions about General Richardson's proposal. The Community Engagement Initiative represents a significant shift in how we allocate defense resources." Amelia studied Glenn's face as he spoke. His words were perfectly calibrated, expressing concern while subtly undermining her credibility, redirecting attention from the security breach to policy debates about her program. Senator Pierce consulted her phone, then looked up with the expression of someone who'd just received very bad news. "General Richardson, I'm afraid we have a problem. Video of this morning's incident is already trending on social media. #General in Cuffs is approaching 1 million views." The political calculus shifted instantly. What had started as an internal security matter was now a public relations crisis that would define not just the funding vote, but potentially the careers of everyone in the room. "The optics are devastating," Secretary Hawkins said quietly. "Either we look incompetent for allowing this to happen, or we look like we're exploiting racial tensions for political gain." Amelia felt the walls closing in. The program she'd spent 2 years developing, initiatives that could prevent other people from experiencing what she'd endured that morning, was being destroyed by the very incident that proved its necessity. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Check your email. You need to see this before you say anything else." Against her better judgment, Amelia glanced at her phone. The email contained a single attachment, security footage from the research facility showing Dr. Glenn making a phone call at 5:47 a.m., 23 minutes before her scheduled arrival. The timestamp proved he'd lied about not knowing her schedule. But it also meant someone else was watching, someone with access to security systems, someone who wanted her to know about Glenn's involvement. The question was whether this anonymous ally was trying to help her or trap her further. "Senators," Amelia said, making a decision that would change everything, "before we proceed with questions about the Community Engagement Initiative, I believe this committee needs to understand that what happened to me this morning wasn't an isolated incident of bias. It was an orchestrated attack on this program by someone in this room." The silence that followed was deafening. The accusation hung in the briefing room air like smoke from a grenade. Senator Pierce's aide frantically typed notes while Secretary Hawkins' face hardened into the expression that had earned her the nickname, the Iron Lady, during her confirmation hearings. "General Richardson," Hawkins said slowly, "you're alleging that someone in this room orchestrated your detention?" Dr. Glenn shifted in his seat, his hands clasping and unclasping on the polished table. "Secretary Hawkins, with respect, General Richardson has been under tremendous pressure developing this proposal. Perhaps this morning's unfortunate incident has affected her judgment." Amelia felt Colonel Park's presence behind her, solid and reassuring in a way that surprised her. They'd worked together for 18 months, but she was just now noticing how he positioned himself. Not just as an aide, but as someone prepared to defend her against any threat. The realization sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, even as the political temperature in the room plummeted. My judgment is fine, Dr. Glenn. What's compromised is the security of this operation. Amelia activated her phone's screen-sharing function, projecting the timestamp evidence to the room's display system. This security footage shows Dr. Glenn making a phone call at 0547 hours, exactly 23 minutes before my arrival, despite his claim that he had no advance knowledge of my schedule. Glenn's face flushed. General, I make dozens of calls each morning. That proves nothing. It proves you lied. Park's voice carried a quiet authority that made everyone turn. Sir, with permission, I'd like to share what we discovered during our drive here. Amelia nodded, surprised by how naturally they moved together, anticipating each other's tactical decisions. When had their professional partnership become something more intuitive? Park activated his own device. Phone records show that Dr. Glenn's call at 0547 connected to a burner phone that was used only twice, once to receive his call, and once to contact the local police tip line at 0549 hours. The senators exchanged glances that spoke volumes about the political earthquake unfolding before them. This wasn't just about police bias anymore. This was about internal sabotage of military operations. Senator Hayes leaned back in his chair, calculating angles. Dr. Glenn, do you have any response to this allegation? Glenn's composure finally cracked. This is exactly what I warned about. General Richardson's initiative threatens to divert billions from essential research into feel-good community programs that won't enhance actual security. Sometimes drastic measures are necessary to protect national interests. The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Amelia felt Park's hand briefly touch her shoulder, a gesture of support that lasted only a second but conveyed volumes about his feelings. She found herself drawing strength from that contact in a way that had nothing to do with military hierarchy. You orchestrated my humiliation to kill my program? Amelia's voice remained steady, but fury burned beneath the surface. I arranged for you to be delayed. I had no idea local officers would be so. Glenn paused, searching for words that wouldn't end his career faster than they already had. So thorough in their interpretation of suspicious activity. Secretary Hawkins stood slowly, her voice deadly quiet. Dr. Glenn, you're relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Security will escort you from the building. But as Glenn was led away, Amelia's phone buzzed again with another message from the unknown number. Glenn is a small fish. Check the committee voting schedule. This goes higher than you think. She glanced at the message, then at the senators around the table. One of them was involved, someone with enough influence to coordinate both the leak and the political pressure to kill her program. Senator Pierce consulted her phone, then looked up with barely concealed satisfaction. Given this morning's events, I move to postpone the funding vote until a full security review can be completed. The American people deserve to know that defense programs aren't being influenced by personal vendettas. The trap was closing. Glenn's confession had removed one threat, but activated another. Pierce was using the security breach as justification to delay the vote indefinitely, knowing that momentum lost in Congress rarely returned. Senator Pierce, Amelia said, postponing this vote will kill community programs that could prevent other Americans from experiencing what I did this morning. General, your personal experience, however regrettable, cannot be the basis for $3 billion in spending decisions. Park stepped closer to Amelia, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from him. She realized he was fighting the urge to defend her more forcefully, struggling between his personal feelings and professional constraints. Actually, Senator Pierce, Secretary Hawkins interjected, I think General Richardson's experience this morning provides the perfect framework for evaluating her proposal. If our own officers can't properly identify a decorated general, how can we trust current protocols to protect other citizens? The room's dynamics shifted as Hawkins repositioned herself. Amelia caught the subtle exchange of glances between Pierce and Hayes, the kind of nonverbal communication that suggested coordination. Her phone buzzed one more time. Pierce and Hayes have been planning this for weeks. Vote happens in 20 minutes regardless of today's events. They're stalling to run out the clock. Check the official schedule. Amelia's heart rate spiked as she realized the full scope of the trap. The morning's detention wasn't meant to delay her. It was meant to discredit her publicly before a vote that was always scheduled to fail. Glenn was expendable, a convenient scapegoat to hide the real conspiracy. Madam Secretary, Amelia said, her voice carrying new urgency, I request permission to address the time-sensitive nature of today's proceedings. Hawkins nodded, but Pierce was already standing. I'm afraid we'll need to recess until the security investigation is complete. Senator, Park spoke up, his formality not quite hiding the steel in his voice. The Defense Authorization Act requires this committee to vote on all submitted proposals before the session ends. You have 18 minutes to comply with federal law. The challenge was clear, and Amelia felt a surge of pride in Park's courage. He was risking his own career to protect her program, and the realization hit her like a physical force. Somewhere between the handcuffs and this moment, their partnership had become something far more personal. Pierce's mask of concern finally slipped, revealing the calculated politician beneath. Colonel, I don't think you understand the complexities. Ma'am, I understand that you're attempting to circumvent mandatory voting procedures to kill a program that threatens interests you represent. The room erupted in heated whispers as the accusation hung in the air. Amelia realized that she and Park were now fighting a battle on multiple fronts, against the committee, against the conspiracy, and against the growing awareness that their professional relationship had crossed lines neither had acknowledged. 17 minutes until the vote that would determine everything. And whoever was sending those anonymous messages was still watching, still helping, still hiding their identity for reasons Amelia couldn't fathom. The real battle was just beginning. The realization hit Amelia like shrapnel from an IED blast. The anonymous messages weren't coming from an ally. Secretary Hawkins was typing on her phone with the same rhythm as the helpful texts arriving in Amelia's inbox. Her mentor, her advocate, the woman who'd championed her promotion to general, was the puppet master orchestrating everything. Glenn's sabotage, the senator's coordinated stalling, even the precise timing of the helpful information. All of it designed to create the perfect political theater. Amelia's mind reeled through the tactical implications. Hawkins needed the community engagement initiative to fail, but she couldn't be seen as opposing racial justice programs directly. So she'd created a scenario where the program would die due to security concerns, while positioning herself as Amelia's supporter. Madam Secretary, Senator Pierce said, consulting her phone, I've just received word that the incident footage is being analyzed by major news networks. Perhaps General Richardson would benefit from media training before we proceed. Hawkins looked up from her phone with practiced concern. That's an excellent suggestion. General, given the sensitive nature of this situation, I think we should postpone. No. Amelia's voice cut through the room's political maneuvering. The vote happens now, as mandated by law. Park sensed the shift in her demeanor and moved closer, their shoulders almost touching. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone in the room, especially Hawkins, whose eyes narrowed as she processed the implications of their obvious partnership. General Richardson, Hawkins said carefully, I appreciate your dedication, but we need to consider the broader ramifications. Your emotional investment in this program may be clouding your judgment. The dismissal was surgical in its precision, undermining Amelia's credibility by suggesting her personal experience made her unreliable. It was the same tactic that had been used against military women for decades, wrapped in concerned mentorship. Amelia felt Park's hand brush against hers, a brief contact that somehow grounded her racing thoughts. The touch was electric, charged with everything they hadn't said during 18 months of working together. She was suddenly, acutely aware that she was fighting for more than just funding. She was fighting for the right to trust her own perceptions in a world designed to gaslight her. Secretary Hawkins, Amelia said slowly, who recommended Dr. Glenn for the facility director position? I fail to see how that's relevant to. Who recommended him? Amelia's tone carried the authority of someone who'd commanded troops under fire. Hawkins' pause was microscopic but telling. He came highly recommended from multiple sources, including you. General, I don't appreciate the implication. The implication is fact. Park stepped forward, his phone displaying a document. Madam Secretary, your signed recommendation letter is in Dr. Glenn's personnel file. You've known him for 12 years, since he was a contractor on classified defense research. The room's atmosphere shifted as the senators realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a direct challenge to the Secretary of Defense's authority by her own general. Hawkins' political mask finally began to slip. Colonel Park, you're overstepping your authority. No, ma'am. I'm protecting national security from internal threats. The declaration hit like a thunderclap. Park wasn't just supporting Amelia professionally anymore. He was making a choice that would define both their careers and their future together. Amelia felt something break open in her chest, a feeling she'd suppressed since her divorce 8 years earlier. Trust. Not just in Park's tactical judgment, but in his character, his integrity, his willingness to risk everything for what was right. And for her. Senator Pierce's aide whispered urgently in her ear. Then Pierce stood abruptly. "I'm afraid we're going to have to. Sit down." Hawkins' command carried decades of political authority, but Pierce hesitated, clearly receiving different instructions through her earpiece. The moment of hesitation revealed everything. Pierce wasn't acting independently. Someone else was coordinating the opposition, someone with enough influence to override even Hawkins' directions. Amelia's phone buzzed with another text. "Not everything is what it seems. Hawkins isn't your enemy. Look behind you." She turned to see Hayes typing on his phone, his fingers moving with the same rhythm as her incoming messages. The room tilted as the conspiracy's true scope revealed itself. Hayes wasn't just a vote against her program. He was orchestrating the entire operation. Hawkins had been trying to help her through carefully coded messages, working within the constraints of political theater to expose the real threat. "Senator Hayes," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "Interesting phone usage for someone allegedly focused on national security." Hayes looked up with the smile of a predator who'd finally been cornered. "General Richardson, you've been quite entertaining this morning. But this little drama ends now." He pressed a button on his phone, and the room's secure communication system activated. "This is Senator Hayes. I'm requesting immediate suspension of General Richardson's security clearance pending investigation of her fitness for command." The political execution was swift and brutal. Without security clearance, Amelia couldn't present classified materials, couldn't access the detailed research supporting her program, couldn't even remain in the briefing room. Park moved to shield her, his body language shifting to something protective and intimate. "Senator, that requires my authorization," Hawkins said quietly, "which you don't have." Hayes' confident expression flickered. "Patricia, we discussed this. The general is clearly unstable. What's unstable is your assumption that I'd sacrifice a decorated officer for your political games." The betrayal was mutual and devastating. Hayes had counted on Hawkins' cooperation, while Hawkins had been gathering evidence of his conspiracy. But Amelia realized they were all missing the bigger picture. Her phone buzzed one final time. Emergency vote called by House leadership. Appropriations Committee has 5 minutes to record position before funding automatically expires. This was always about timing. She looked around the room, at Hawkins, whose support had cost her political capital, at Park, whose devotion had become undeniable, at the senators whose careers hung in the balance, at the aides frantically trying to manage a crisis spiraling beyond anyone's control. 4 minutes and 30 seconds to save a program that could change everything. And she was still in handcuff bruised wrists, fighting for credibility in a room where her own experience of injustice was being weaponized against the solution. The secure phone in Hawkins' hand rang with the distinctive tone reserved for the highest levels of government. She answered with visible reluctance, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up with the expression of someone who'd just received a death sentence. "General Richardson, I'm sorry. The President has been briefed on this morning's security breach. Your clearance is suspended pending full investigation." The words hit like a physical blow. Without clearance, Amelia couldn't access the classified research data that formed the backbone of her presentation. The committee couldn't vote on a program they weren't legally allowed to hear described in detail. "Madam Secretary," Park stepped forward, "that's a career-ending decision based on incomplete information. Colonel Park, you're relieved of duty effective immediately." Hawkins' voice carried genuine pain. "Report to your commanding officer for reassignment." The room spun as Amelia realized the true scope of the trap. Hayes hadn't just orchestrated her detention. He'd created a scenario where defending her program would destroy everyone who supported her. Hawkins couldn't override presidential authority without destroying her own position. Park couldn't continue advocating without facing court-martial for insubordination. "Jim," Amelia said quietly, using his first name for the first time in 18 months. The intimacy of it sent shockwaves through the room's formal atmosphere. "Don't do this. Don't throw away your career for you." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made the political theater around them fade into background noise. "Amelia, I would throw away everything for you." The declaration hung in the air, transforming their professional relationship into something that could never be taken back. Senator Pierce's aide typed frantically, capturing every word for the political ammunition it would provide. Hayes smiled with predatory satisfaction. How touching. The general and her colonel, brought down by their own inability to maintain professional boundaries. Hawkins stepped between them, her voice sharp with authority. Colonel Park, you will report immediately to General Morrison's office. General Richardson, you will surrender all classified materials and exit this facility within 10 minutes. The separation was surgical and brutal. Park was escorted toward the door by security personnel who'd appeared as if by magic. Before leaving, he turned back to Amelia with an expression that conveyed everything they couldn't say in front of witnesses. This isn't over, he said simply. Yes, it is. Hayes stood triumphantly. The Community Engagement Initiative is dead. The appropriations window expires in 3 minutes, and this committee cannot vote on a program with no presenter, no classified support materials, and no security clearance authorization. Amelia stood alone in the center of the room, watching her life's work crumble around her. The program that could have prevented thousands of incidents like her morning's humiliation was dying because of that very humiliation. The poetic injustice was almost unbearable. Senators, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart, you have a choice. Vote to fund programs that address systemic bias in law enforcement, or explain to your constituents why you allowed political theater to override public safety. Pierce consulted her phone with barely concealed glee. General, without your classified presentation, we have no substantive basis for evaluation. I move to table the initiative indefinitely. Seconded. Hayes added quickly. The vote was perfunctory and devastating. 3-2 against, with Hawkins abstaining due to conflict of interest. $3 billion in community policing programs vanished with a show of hands. As the senators filed out, Hayes paused beside Amelia. You never understood the game, General. This was never about your program. It was about proving that people like you can't be trusted with real authority. Today's footage will ensure that every time someone mentions military leadership, they'll remember a black woman in handcuffs claiming to be a general. The psychological warfare was precise and personal. Hayes hadn't just killed her program. He'd weaponized her experience of injustice to perpetuate the very systems she'd tried to reform. Alone in the briefing room, Amelia sank into a chair and stared at the blank presentation screen. Her phone buzzed with news alerts. General in handcuffs. Military leadership crisis deepens. Defense spending program killed after security breach. Questions raised about fitness for command. The narrative was already being written, and it bore no resemblance to the truth she'd lived. Through the window, she could see Park's SUV disappearing into Washington traffic, carrying him toward a career reassignment that would keep them on opposite coasts. Their moment of connection had cost him everything, and her inability to protect him felt worse than her own professional destruction. Her personal phone rang. The caller ID showed her daughter's number, calling from her freshman year at Howard University. Mom, I just saw the news. Are you okay? The question broke something inside her chest. How could she explain to her daughter that the country they'd both served, Amelia in uniform, her daughter through academic excellence and community service, had just demonstrated that protection and justice were still conditional on race, rank, and political convenience? I'm fine, baby. Just a rough day at work. Mom, the video, they treated you like what I am, Amelia said quietly. A black woman who forgot her place. The admission tasted like defeat. After 37 years of service, 2 combat deployments, and a lifetime of proving herself worthy of respect, she was still just another target for people who saw her skin before her stars. Outside the window, Washington continued its daily business of power and compromise, indifferent to the dreams that died in its marble halls. Amelia closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where any of this made sense. She couldn't. The silence in Amelia's Pentagon office felt different from the comfortable quiet of early morning preparations. This was the hollow silence of endings, punctuated only by the rhythmic sound of her packing personal items into cardboard boxes. 3 decades of military service reduced to memorabilia and commendations that suddenly felt like artifacts from someone else's life. Her aide knocked softly before entering. Ma'am, there's been a development. Lieutenant Paul carried herself with the rigid posture of someone delivering news that would change everything again. In her hands was a tablet displaying what appeared to be internal communications. General, We've discovered additional evidence about this morning's incident. The investigation team found deleted messages on Dr. Glenn's phone. Amelia looked up from packing her West Point graduation photo. Paul, my clearance is suspended. I can't review classified materials. Ma'am, these communications aren't classified. They're personal messages between Dr. Glenn and someone identified only as the chairman. The title sent chills down Amelia's spine. She accepted the tablet and read messages that revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Glenn wasn't just working with Hayes. They were both answering to someone with enough influence to coordinate attacks across multiple government agencies. The deleted messages revealed the true scope. Phase 1 complete. Subject detained as planned. Proceed to Phase 2, media narrative deployment. Phase 3 authorization pending. Paul, where did you get this? Colonel Park, ma'am. Before his reassignment, he convinced the FBI's cyber crimes unit to examine Dr. Glenn's devices. He said you'd need evidence that could restore your clearance and salvage the program. The mention of Park's name sent conflicting emotions through her chest. Gratitude for his continued advocacy, heartbreak over the cost to his career, and a growing awareness that their connection had transcended professional boundaries in ways that complicated everything. Where is Colonel Park now? Paul hesitated. Ma'am, he's been assigned to Fort Bragg. Transportation security position. It's not commensurate with his qualifications. The demotion was punishment disguised as reassignment. Park had sacrificed his career trajectory to help her, and the knowledge felt like carrying shrapnel in her heart. General, there's more. Paul activated another document. The FBI traced the chairman communications to a government phone registered to Congressman Michael Foster, chair of the House Defense Appropriations Committee. The revelation recontextualized everything. Foster had been positioning himself as a champion of military reform while secretly orchestrating efforts to discredit the very reforms he publicly supported. The morning's detention wasn't just about killing her program. It was about providing Foster with evidence that military leadership was fundamentally compromised. Amelia's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about the timing felt significant. General Richardson? This is Agent Sarah Diaz from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We need to meet immediately. 30 minutes later, Amelia sat in a downtown coffee shop across from Agent Diaz, whose no-nonsense demeanor reminded her of younger versions of herself, focused, determined, and carrying the weight of systemic skepticism about her authority. General, your experience this morning was part of a coordinated effort to discredit military reform initiatives. We've been investigating Congressman Foster's financial connections to private military contractors who profit from current defense spending allocations. Diaz spread documents across the small table, each one revealing another layer of corruption. Foster had been receiving substantial contributions from companies that would lose billions if community engagement programs received funding. The beautiful part of their plan, Diaz continued, was using your own experience of injustice to kill programs designed to address injustice. They turned your victimization into evidence of your unfitness. Amelia studied the financial records, her tactical mind processing the implications. Agent Diaz, what exactly are you asking me to do? We need you to testify before a grand jury. Your testimony could expose corruption that goes to the highest levels of defense appropriations. The request hung between them like an unexploded ordnance. Testifying would restore her credibility, but ensure that powerful enemies would never stop targeting her. Refusing would preserve what remained of her career, but allow the corruption to continue unchecked. General, I have to tell you, there's a personal cost. Congressman Foster has already begun spreading rumors about your relationship with Colonel Park. If you proceed with testimony, those rumors will become public attacks on both your personal and professional judgment. The threat was clear. Expose the corruption and watch her relationship with Park become ammunition for character assassination. Stay silent and preserve their privacy while allowing injustice to flourish. Amelia closed her eyes and thought about her daughter's voice on the phone, asking if she was okay. She thought about Park's willingness to sacrifice his career for her principles. She thought about every young officer who would face similar choices in the years ahead. Agent Diaz, when would I testify? Tomorrow morning. But General, you need to understand. Once you walk into that grand jury room, there's no going back. Foster has allies who will make your life hell for years. Amelia looked out the coffee shop window at the pedestrians hurrying through their daily routines, most of them unaware that their government was being corrupted by people who saw power as a commodity to be traded rather than a responsibility to be honored. Her phone buzzed with a text from Park. Heard about the FBI contact. Whatever you decide, know that loving you is worth everything I lost. The message broke her heart and strengthened her resolve simultaneously. He'd used the past tense, loved, not love, suggesting that he understood their future had been sacrificed for their principles. But maybe some sacrifices were worth making. Agent Diaz, I'll testify. But I have conditions. The federal grand jury room felt like a tribunal from another century. Dark wood paneling, harsh fluorescent lighting, and 23 citizens who would determine whether justice was still possible in a system designed to protect its own corruption. Agent Diaz had warned Amelia that Congressman Foster's legal team would be watching from the gallery, ready to exploit any perceived weakness in her testimony. What Diaz hadn't mentioned was that Secretary Hawkins would also be present, sitting in the front row with an expression Amelia couldn't read. General Richardson, the federal prosecutor began, please state for the record your experience on the morning of December 25th. Amelia had rehearsed this moment, but standing before the grand jury felt different from every briefing room she'd commanded. Here, her authority came not from rank but from truth, and the distinction felt both terrifying and liberating. She began with the handcuffs, describing the cold metal against her wrists while federal employees filmed her humiliation. She explained the systematic leaks of her schedule, the coordination between Glenn and Hayes, the political theater designed to kill programs that could prevent other Americans from experiencing similar injustice. But as she spoke, Amelia noticed something odd. The prosecutor wasn't surprised by any of her revelations. The questions felt scripted, as if everyone in the room already knew what she was going to say. General Richardson, the prosecutor continued, did you suspect at any point that your detention was orchestrated by allies rather than enemies? The question hit like a tactical nuclear weapon. Amelia's mind reeled as the implications crystallized. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? General, the FBI has evidence that your detention was arranged by Secretary Hawkins as part of an elaborate sting operation to expose Congressman Foster's corruption network. The room tilted. Amelia looked at Hawkins, who finally allowed herself a small smile that mixed apology with professional satisfaction. Secretary Hawkins, the prosecutor called, would you please join General Richardson at the witness table? Hawkins stood with the grace of someone who'd been carrying a massive secret for months. As she approached, Amelia felt reality restructuring itself around revelations she should have seen coming. General Richardson, Hawkins said quietly, I'm sorry for the deception. But we needed authentic reactions, authentic emotion, authentic outrage. Foster's network was too sophisticated to be caught through traditional investigation. The prosecutor activated a large screen displaying communications intercepted over the previous 6 months. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you're about to see is evidence of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of defense appropriations. The messages revealed a network far more extensive than Amelia had imagined. Foster wasn't just taking contributions from defense contractors. He was actively coordinating with foreign agents to undermine American military readiness. The Community Engagement Initiative wasn't just one program under attack. It was a test case for whether American defense policy could be purchased by hostile foreign interests. General Richardson, Hawkins explained, your program represented the single greatest threat to this network because it would have created oversight mechanisms they couldn't corrupt. We needed to let them reveal themselves completely before we could act. So my detention, Amelia's voice trailed off as the full scope became clear, was arranged with local officers who thought they were participating in a security drill. They had no idea you were a general, no idea they were being filmed, no idea their reactions would expose implicit biases that foreign agents were exploiting to undermine American military leadership. Agent Diaz stepped forward with another tablet. General, the officers who detained you this morning were responding to information provided by assets working for Chinese intelligence services. Foster's network has been systematically feeding foreign agents intelligence about American military movements, using racial profiling as cover for their activities. The revelation was staggering. Her morning's humiliation hadn't just been about killing one program. It was part of a foreign intelligence operation designed to weaken American military effectiveness by exploiting domestic racial tensions. The beautiful part, Hawkins continued, was that we needed your genuine emotional reactions to sell the deception. If you'd known it was a sting operation, Foster's people would have detected the setup immediately. Amelia felt something breaking open in her chest. Not devastation this time, but a complex mixture of pride, fury, and profound respect for the strategic thinking that had sacrificed her dignity to save national security. Madam Secretary, are you telling me that my career, my relationship with Colonel Park, my daughter's perception of American justice, all of that was sacrificed for this operation? Hawkins' expression softened with genuine regret. General, I'm telling you that your courage this morning exposed a conspiracy that could have compromised American military operations for decades. Yes, the cost was personal, but the victory is generational. The prosecutor activated another screen showing arrest warrants being executed in real time. Based on evidence gathered through this operation, federal agents are currently arresting 17 individuals, including Congressman Foster, for defense contractors, 2 Pentagon officials, and 6 foreign intelligence assets. Amelia watched the arrests unfold on screen, feeling her personal trauma transform into something larger and more significant. Her morning's humiliation had become the linchpin in dismantling a foreign intelligence network. General Richardson, the prosecutor continued, there's one more revelation. Colonel Park wasn't just reassigned to Fort Bragg. He's been working with the FBI's counterintelligence unit, using his reassignment as cover to investigate Foster's network from the inside. The words hit her like a physical force. Park's sacrifice hadn't ended his career. It had been part of the larger operation all along. He's here today, Hawkins said softly, waiting outside to brief you on Phase 2 of the operation. Phase 2. There was more. General, Congress reconvenes in emergency session tomorrow morning to vote on an expanded community engagement initiative. Not $3 billion, but $12 billion, with bipartisan support and presidential backing. Your testimony today didn't just expose corruption. It created the political momentum for the largest police reform initiative in American history. Amelia sat in stunned silence as the scope of the victory became clear. Her morning's detention had been orchestrated not to destroy her program, but to create unassailable evidence of the need for it. Every moment of humiliation had been carefully calculated to generate the political support necessary to pass reforms that would protect millions of Americans. The question now, Hawkins said, is whether you're willing to lead the implementation of these programs, knowing that doing so will make you a permanent target for every enemy of American justice. Through the grand jury room's windows, Amelia could see Park waiting in the hallway, his dress uniform bearing the ribbons of someone who'd been quietly fighting for justice while she thought he'd been sacrificed for it. The choice was clear: accept leadership of the most significant police reform initiative in American history, or retreat to the safety of conventional military service. But as she looked at the arrest footage still playing on the screens, showing corrupt officials being led away in handcuffs, Amelia realized there had never really been a choice at all. Some battles were worth every sacrifice they demanded. 6 months later, Amelia stood in the same Pentagon briefing room where her world had imploded and been reborn. But now the polished table was surrounded by a different kind of power. Community leaders, police chiefs from 12 major cities, civil rights attorneys, and military officers who'd volunteered for the most challenging assignment of their careers. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd survived political crucifixion and emerged stronger. The Community Engagement Initiative has exceeded every projection. Civilian complaints against military police have dropped 60%. Community trust ratings have increased across all demographic categories. And most importantly, we haven't had a single incident of mistaken identity detention in any participating jurisdiction. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The program born from her humiliation had become the most successful police reform initiative in American history. Colonel Park, recently promoted and now serving as her deputy director, stood to present the quarterly statistics. Their working relationship had evolved into something deeper and more complex since the revelations about the sting operation. The professional respect had always been there, but now it was layered with the knowledge that they'd both sacrificed everything for principles they shared. The data shows consistent improvement across all metrics, Park reported, his eyes meeting hers with the kind of professional intimacy that spoke to both their history and their future. Community policing protocols developed through this initiative are being adopted internationally. We've received implementation requests from 15 allied nations. After the briefing, as participants filed out discussing regional deployment strategies, Amelia and Park found themselves alone for the first time in weeks. The silence between them carried the weight of everything they'd been through and everything they hadn't yet acknowledged about where it had led them. "Jim," she said softly, using his first name in a way that had once seemed dangerous and now felt natural. "That morning when you said you'd throw away everything for me. I meant it." His response was immediate and certain. "I still mean it. Even though you didn't have to? Even though it was all orchestrated?" Park stepped closer, close enough that she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow from his deployment in Afghanistan. "Amelia, what I felt that morning wasn't orchestrated. What I feel now isn't part of any operation. The sting may have been planned, but my feelings for you were real." The admission hung between them like a bridge they could choose to cross or leave unbuilt. 6 months of working together with perfect professionalism, both of them carefully avoiding the conversation that could change everything again. "The regulations," she began, "have been updated to allow relationships between officers of different command structures when disclosed and approved through proper channels," he finished with a slight smile. "I may have researched that thoroughly." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a call from her daughter. "Mom, I just saw the CNN interview. You looked amazing. And I wanted you to know what you went through that morning. It changed how I see everything. You showed me that sometimes getting knocked down is just the setup for standing up stronger." The conversation with her daughter reminded Amelia that the morning's trauma had rippled through her family in ways both painful and ultimately empowering. Her daughter had switched her major to criminal justice, inspired by her mother's transformation of personal injustice into systemic change. After ending the call, Amelia looked out the window at the Washington Monument, thinking about the conversation she'd had with Agent Diaz the week before. The FBI had tracked down the officers who detained her that December morning. Both had requested transfers to departments implementing her community engagement protocols, seeking redemption through service to the communities they'd once misjudged. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said to Park. "If I could go back to that morning, knowing everything I know now, I wouldn't change what happened. Even the handcuffs? Even the humiliation. Especially that. Because it was real. My outrage was authentic. My pain was genuine, and that authenticity is what made everything else possible. You can't fake the kind of emotion that changes hearts and minds." Park moved to stand beside her at the window, their shoulders touching in a way that felt both casual and significant. "So what happens now? We've successfully implemented the program, exposed the corruption, changed policy at the highest levels. What's next for General Richardson?" "What's next," she said, turning to face him fully, "is that I accept the Secretary of Defense position when Secretary Hawkins retires next month." Park's eyes widened. "Amelia, that would make you the first Black woman Secretary of Defense. With a Deputy Secretary who understands that the most important battles aren't fought in foreign countries. They're fought in American communities where trust between citizens and those who serve them either flourishes or dies." The implication was clear. She was offering him the chance to continue their partnership at the highest levels of American defense policy, both professionally and personally. "Are you asking me to be your deputy secretary?" he said with mock formality. "Or are you asking me something else entirely? I'm asking if you're ready to spend the next few years changing how America thinks about justice, knowing that it will be the hardest thing either of us has ever done. Together." Park's answer came in the form of a kiss that was both gentle and certain, the kind of declaration that transformed partnerships into promises. When they broke apart, Amelia realized that the woman who'd been handcuffed in front of federal employees 6 months ago had been fundamentally different from the woman standing here now. The trauma had been real, but so had the growth it enabled. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Senate confirms first Black woman as Secretary of Defense. The nomination she'd accepted only hours before had moved through Congress with unprecedented bipartisan support, propelled by the success of programs born from her morning of injustice. As the sun set over the Pentagon, casting long shadows through the briefing room windows, Amelia thought about the circular nature of justice. The handcuffs that had humiliated her had ultimately become the key that unlocked systemic change. The detention that was meant to destroy her credibility had instead created the credibility to transform American defense policy. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new attempts by powerful interests to undermine progress. But tonight, standing in the room where her career had nearly ended and her real mission had begun, Amelia Richardson felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for herself or for Park, or even for the programs they'd created together. Hope for every American who'd ever been judged by their appearance rather than their character. Hope for every officer who wanted to serve their community with honor. Hope for a future where justice wasn't conditional on race or rank or political convenience. The handcuffs were gone, but the lessons they'd taught about power, about assumption, about the courage required to transform pain into progress would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. Outside the windows, Washington continued its eternal dance of power and principle. But inside this room, two people who'd found each other through shared commitment to justice were ready to change the world. One community, one policy, one courageous decision at a time. What did this story teach you about the power of transforming personal injustice into systemic change? How can we turn our most painful experiences into fuel for progress that helps others? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world.